Thank you very much, Amo. So, we get to our first question here, and it is not scripted, and it is to my former colleague, Dr. Eric Davis. And be very careful how I ask this specific question. Welcome, Mr. Loeb. Good to see you, as always.
Sorry about that.
Yeah, it's okay. Dr. Davis, I know your background and I know your work in our former program, the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program. I also know to some degree some of the history and first-hand experience you have on UAP. I believe that this committee and the esteemed members of Congress and the American public would love to hear, to the degree you're able to discuss it, the direct access you had. For those who don't know, Dr. Davis was, and I'll let him answer this, it was submitted into the matter of record for Congress a couple of years ago. The Wilson Davis memo. It was alleged that he was the author of it. And if you don't know what that is, I encourage you to look it up. It has been entered as a matter of public record in the congressional record, and it is extremely significant. This is the man, I won't say he did or he didn't, I'll let him tell you, who authored that potentially. And furthermore, I know has had an involvement in the UAP program, specifically from a crash retrieval perspective. Now, we have to be mindful here. Dr. Davis, please be careful of security classification, but do you mind sharing, to the degree you're comfortable with, your involvement with information related to crash retrievals and your experience?
Sure. Want me to come up?
No, good.
Oh.
Thank you, Lou. I'm an astrophysicist and also what Mark Meltz at NASA and I call the breakthrough propulsion physicist. We worked on breakthrough propulsion from 1996 to 2002, and then we continued after that to develop a book that we published in the AFRL Press in 2009. Frontiers of Propulsion Science. So my background is in advanced deep space and interstellar space flight, mostly fast through light propulsion through the use of general relativity theory and quantum field theory, as well as advanced nuclear propulsion like nuclear fission and nuclear fusion. And the energy propulsion, which I worked on as a principal investigator for the Air Force Research Lab at Edwards Air Force Base. So I've got quite a broad background. And I began my work in UFOs or UAP, starting in 1996, when Robert Bigelow hired me and worked for him as his director of aerospace physics and astrophysics at the National Institute for Discovery Science. And that was a pretty transformative job for him, because as a physical scientist, I'm seeing for the first time mod phenomena. I'm investigating it using forensic science techniques in the field and reviewing witness, collecting data. And I have a team of colleagues on the staff that I work with, also PhDs. And we had a world-class science advisory board, which my former boss in Austin, Hal Path, was on that science advisory board and was the last chairman of that board, actually. We also had Apollo 14 astronaut Ed Mitchell, and for a short time Apollo 17 astronaut Jack Schmidt. And we had many academicians and former CIA, national intelligence officers, social psychologists, medical doctors, and nuclear engineers, and the list goes on. We had shock police primarily as well. So it was a really transformative, because I grew up in the 60s and 70s, and I became familiar with Carl Sagan. Carl Sagan and astronomer Thornton Page co-authored a book called UFOs, A Scientific Debate, which was published by the AAAS Press. The AAAS is the American Association for the Advancement of Science, and science is their prestigious journal that they publish. And so that was a prestigious publication, that book. Every chapter was authored by experts in the field and academia who have studied UFOs and some angle of it from scientific data standpoint. Data that was collected, data that was analyzed. And so they presented it, published the book. For a bizarre reason, in the 1980s, Carl Sagan had his wonderful astronomy show called Cosmos, and the companion book for that. And what's ironic is that he changed 180 degrees. He all of a sudden went from being UFOs. We have in this book that I co-authored or co-edited with Thornton Page, all of this wonderful data that's been collected that is not explainable due to conventional astronomical, weather, or man-made explanations or events or objects. I'm now calling it pseudoscience. It's fringe science. People are mistaken. Pilots have poor vision. Military pilots especially. And I've heard that from Leonard David, who's a aerospace engineering, aviation, space exploration writer. And people like him have said that our military pilots, especially the ones at the USS Nimitz, during its encounter of the Tic-Tac UAP back in November of 2004, oh yes, those pilots have poor vision. They're flying, what, $20 million fighter aircraft?
Yeah, 41
And they
million.
have poor vision. How did they get through the Naval Aviation Program and Top Gun School with poor vision?
Dr. Davis, could you elaborate a little bit on your, again, to the degree intercomputer?
Oh, I know. So it was a transformative issue for me, or a job. It transformed my worldview. It opened up my worldview to a lot more possibilities than what I was used to thinking. As a trained PhD physicist, I earned my doctorate in astrophysics at the University of Arizona in '91. And so I worked on 3 space missions in graduate school, the IRAS, which is the Infrared Astronomical Satellite Program, and the 2 Voyager missions to the outer planets. So it's pertaining to the topic that Lou wants me to talk about. I'm not trying to move away. It is a sensitive subject. It's due to astronaut Ed Mitchell, Dr. Ed Mitchell, Captain USN retired. Because of him, and I won't go into a long story, but it's because of him that I got on the trail of looking for the so-called legend within the UFO community. The retrieval of crashed or landed UAP craft, or UFO craft as they become back to those days. And by the way, UAP, the term unidentified aerial phenomenon, goes back to the 1940s even. So I followed this trail, and I ended up, over the course of the following 2.5 decades, working for Bigelow, working for the Air Force Research Lab, working for Hal Cutoff at EarthTech International Incorporated, and then working at the Aerospace Corporation. So we're working in a combination of industry and classified programs that we were contracted to do on behalf of for the Defense Intelligence Agency and for the Pentagon agencies that Lou worked at, and the UAP task force that Jay Stratton led at the Office of Naval Intelligence. And so a long story short is that I came into contact with industry leaders, technical scientists, both active duty and later retired, as well as intelligence officers, generals, admirals, colonels, people who directed intelligence or human intelligence collection and analysis directorates at the DIA and the Central Intelligence Agency, who reached out to me to have me do some foreign UAP intelligence analysis and assessment. And so I have been exposed to so much in the classified world that I can tell you definitively that there is a there. The human race, basically the world's biggest governments, like the United States, our adversary China and Russia, at least as far as I know, have had the occasion to recover craft that have either landed or crashed or both in their territory or even outside of their territories, and have taken those back to the most sensitive of their programs that they've ever had. These programs are even more sensitive and more well hidden than the Manhattan Project was, or the modern nuclear weapons industry and the U.S. military and the Department of Energy programs to maintain and upgrade and modernize our nuclear weapons arsenal. And so this is one of the most well hidden programs. It is hidden from congressional oversight, and always has been. And it was hidden by the action of the President Eisenhower, who instituted presidential emergency action directives during his administration. These directives are not shared with Congress. They were classified. And when the Freedom of Information Act was instituted in the 70s, those are not subjected to the Freedom of Information Act request. These directives provide cover for actions that are associated with the retrieval of these vehicles and the scientific and engineering study of them. And that takes place within the industry. What happens is the Department of Defense offices, CIA offices, they create shell companies. They give a sole source contract to the shell company who passes the money to a selected group of defense industry firms. And those firms will take that contract money and turn them around and use that as internal funding. It's called internal research and development funds, which they give to their own people inside their company, their own employees, to do the reverse engineering and analysis and study of these recovered fuels. And so this avoids all congressional oversight. It avoids the Gang of Eight. And it's one of the most clever techniques used to hide it. And as far as I know, only 1 4-star general and 1 and 3-star admiral were able to locate these programs. And that's about as much as I can say. They located the programs and they uncovered them. One got a lot of resistance and hostile reception and was told that he found who he was looking for. They were who they were suspected of being. Yes, they were a UFO, UAP crash retrieval and reverse engineering program. The other one had a lot more political power behind him because of his stature as a 4-star general. And he was able to get into the program and use his authority and his access. I think they call that a super user. The super user that access to all with that super user special access programs. So he had his capability available within into that whole thing. I was fortunate to meet Dave Grusch at the behest of Jay Stratton. Dave was a NRO liaison officer to the UAP task force, and Dave was working for his boss at the NRO, which was situated in the second floor skiffs of the Aerospace Corporation building in Colorado Springs. And I was assigned to work at the Aerospace Corporation facility in Huntsville, Alabama, because I was supporting NASA's Space Nuclear Propulsion Program office. So Jay put Dave and Dave's boss and I together, and I briefed them for 2.5 days, just the week before COVID struck. And Dave took all of my classified and proprietary information of all the investigations I did at NIDS, AFRL, and working for help put off at EarthTech, and he took that data and ran with it. And what you now know, the aftermath of that was his classified whistleblower complaint to the IG of the IC. And so there's a there. We have had this program going on in various guises, various code names. Code names change roughly every 3 years. They often shift around due to major office and programmatic new organizations for presidential administration maybe every 5 to 10 years in some cases. And so these things are very old. They come in, they've gone, but they're still around. And the kind of money that's been involved, I would say since the beginning in 1944 with the first recovery of Italy, of U.S. Army's recovery of a craft that crashed in Italy back in 1933. The United States Army, when invaded Italy and pushed the Third Reich out, they were able to recover that craft and bring it back to Wright Airfield. And all of the crash retrievals that have taken place generally on land have gone to Wright Airfield. The majority of the crash retrievals or recoveries of whatever situation it was take place in the maritime environment. And I'm not sure where that is going. I think they're probably also going to were in those days Wright Airfield. I don't know where they're going today though, because I've only worked on the legacy history of this part of it up until about the early 2010s. And ever since the end of the OSAP and the ATIP, I don't know where those operations are going on these days. So I think that's about it, Lou.
Is that it?
That's the question I wanted to ask, and I'll just say this really easily. Leslie King and Ralph Blumenthal asked me this for an interview I gave them in July of 2020 for the New York Times article that they published. They interviewed Lou and former Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid. I think Harry was already retired then, wasn't he? Yeah. Okay, so I said basically my interface with the leadership at the industry, which were a number of individuals, is the follower. The craft that have been recovered are not of this earth. They're not made by human cows. They are not from this planet. They are not human. They are an alien technology, whatever the word alien means. Are they extraterrestrial? We don't know. We don't know. What motives do they have? Well, we need anthropologists and social psychologists and philosophers to figure that out because they haven't communicated that to us. Yeah. So physicists like me and Avi, we cannot answer questions like motive. We just need to take data. We call it measurements and signals intelligence in the intelligence industry. And Avi, I support 1,000% because we need him to do what he needs to do. UAPX is another group from the University of Albany in Albany, New York. They're doing that as well. And there are other groups out there building up their own sensor suites to try to scan the sky full-time, 24/7, to look for something that's hot, and definitely not weather, definitely not an aircraft, and definitely not a kid's little quadcopter.
Well, thank you, Dr. Davis. My recommendation would be at some point here to get you in a classified setting like some of the rest of us, and you've already done that before, and have a free conversation with some of the representatives who I think would be very interested to hear the other part of that conversation, which I am aware of and been part of. With that said, before we go on, I wanted to thank real quick Rep. Nick Begich for, how do you pronounce your name, sir? I apologize. Begich, okay, forgive me. Begich. Rep. Nick Begich, who arrived here just not too long ago, so thank you, sir, very much. From Alabama? Rep from Alabama.
Alaska.
Oh, Alaska.
He's like the hub for this stuff.
Sir, my humble apologies. Obviously, I'm going to blame my dyslexia instead of whoever wrote this for me. So. Thank you, sir, for being here, and also great seeing you, Mr. As far as the next question, what I'd like to do is direct this to Admiral Gallaudet. Sir, only about 50% of the seafloor has been mapped in high resolution. In fact, some have stipulated that we know even more about the surface of our own moon than the depths of our own oceans. What concrete mapping campaigns, autonomous gliders, deep sea sonars, or cabled observatories would give researchers the best chance of detecting undersea UAP activity? Up to this point, we've been discussing about the stuff we see in our skies and possibly space, but the one thing we've neglected are those observations of UAP that are underwater. And this kind of goes to the whole trans-medium characteristic that we're seeing that some of these UAP can display, particularly as a former Navy man and member of NOAA. What advice could you offer there?
Thanks, Lou. That's a great question. And in fact, I would advise us to continue what we started in Trump's first administration. And what we did is we got him to sign a presidential memorandum on mapping the U.S. exclusive economic zone. And that directed the establishment of a strategy, a plan, a national strategy, a plan, and a council, an area agency council, to contribute to the effort. And so in the we did this in 2020, and in the 5 years since, we've been able to go from having 40% of our EEZ map to 50%. And it involves not only using ships with sonar, but also exploring the water column with deep diving remotely operated vehicles, swarms of drones, underwater drones. I used to own 120 in the Navy, and that fleet's grown. And NOAA has a pretty sizable fleet of underwater and surface drones, and they partner with the private sector that has a vast capability as well. So I'd say we really want to expand the work that's already occurring within the government and the private sector, and target it, because most of it is targeted towards ocean science, and that's great. But if we open the aperture a bit and include UAP as a research target, I think we'll learn a lot more about the phenomena as well as the ocean.
Thank you very much. The next question we have is geared towards Dr. Avi Loeb here, and my question for you, sir, is what is your recommendation for the new generation of scientists who want to enter into this field of study but don't know exactly where to begin?
Yes, I actually gave up on the senior members of our community, and I bear a great hope that the young generation will approach it without any bias, because science is all about evidence and curiosity. And we lose that when we become the adults in the room. So for the young people, in fact, I was asked to establish a Galileo observatory in a new stem cell campus that will be built in Indiana. And I'm very excited about that, because those high school students and fledgling scientists would be unbiased they would look at the data and try to figure it out. That's the way science should be done. And very often, if you assume something, if you say there is nothing out there and you are not looking, then obviously that's a self-fulfilling prophecy. So I very much hope that the young generation will approach this subject without any stigma, without any prejudice, without any bias, because it's of great interest to national security. And even if it has nothing to do with what lies outside the solar system, we need to figure it out. Maybe other nations have technologies that we are not aware of. And if we do find something from outside the solar system, it's the biggest discovery ever made in science. It will change our perception and our place in the universe. I had a group of religious people that came and they belong to Christianity Today, an organization, and they asked me what would be the implications to religion. And I said, well, I have 2 daughters, and when the second one was born, I didn't lose any of my love to the first one. So imagining that God can only attend to one civilization is very limiting. And I think, in fact, it would be enriching to realize that we have siblings. We might be jealous if they're more advanced than we are. Maybe they get more attention. But, that's exciting. We may get inspiration from finding something better than us. So why is it that academia, the mainstream, is shying away from this? Partly because the public cares so much about it. And, there are lots of statements that are not correct, that being made by people who have no evidence, but that should not be a reason to avoid this subject. We should study it, and young people, I think, have the ability to figure it out. If we have the resources allocated to the research, we'll figure it out. We have the equipment. It's much more exciting than figuring out what dark matter is, whether there are microbes on exoplanets, which probably exist in any warm water environment similar to Earth. I'm willing to bet that there are microbes, but I don't care much about them. I really want to find things that are better than us so that we can get better, we can improve ourselves. And the young generation hopefully will do it for us if we only allocate the resources, if we don't block them, because the gatekeepers, use this technique of not funding such research, ridiculing it. And even when I went on the expedition, people said, oh, he will not find anything. Oh, he went to the wrong place. We don't believe the US government data from the US Space Command. And my suggestion is just to ignore the naysayers because they are boring.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you, Dr. Loeb. I'm going to make this very quick. I know one of the representatives is very short on time, but there's a question I'm about to ask in her presence. The question goes to Dr. Davis, Eric Davis. We've had discussions at length in certain settings, in formal official settings you might be part of, where we talk about exotic material. I think it might be very helpful to the degree you can. Can you please explain what makes exotic material that has been recovered from the U.S. government exotic? What makes it different from atomically and chemically?
It's actually a very simple answer. It's the way it's fabricated. It's the way it's fabricated. That's what makes it exotic. It's not a new element that's never been discovered and placed on the periodic table of elements. No. The materials are in the periodic tables. They're either radioactive isotopes that we already know of, or they're any of the other non-radioactive, non-actinide elements on the table. It's just the combination of the materials is unusual. It could be that you could say that that's exotic, but it's the composition. It's how you built the craft, the materials that form the craft, and everything inside the craft. It's quite exotic because one of the company's leadership was a young material scientist when he graduated with his doctorate in material science from one of the universities in Illinois back in 1970. And he was hired by David Grusch to go to work with him and a team at Skepticism. That was the Advanced Projects Development Agency, I think is what Lockheed Aircraft Company called it back in those days. So, so basically, this is what he was telling me. He's an advanced material scientist, and he said, well, we could use the best diagnostic equipment we had back in those days, which was 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s, and we could see the elements through mass spectroscopy that compose these structures. But when we look at how they're composed and structured, it's like nothing we've been able to fabricate on Earth. We've never been able to produce it on Earth. And we have no extrapolated engineering or physics technology to tell us or inform us on how we could possibly learn how to fabricate this on Earth. So they understood that it's the combination of the elements was very unusual. It was counterintuitive, but it's the way the materials are fabricated. That's what makes it exotic.
Excellent. Thank you very much, sir. Next question is going to go to.
Lou, if I can real
Yes,
quick.
ma'am. Absolutely. The floor is yours.
Yeah, so thank you for you guys coming today. I have to get going, but I am charging Burlison and Burchett to be here and continue on while I am not here. But I will say that, I mean, the stuff that you guys have all told us today, mind-blowing. And I think, going on record is even more important. So we are going to invite you back to also testify at some point. But I do have to head out. So thank you so much for your time setting this up, and we'll be back. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so the next question is going to go to Admiral Gallaudet.
Yeah.
I've got a long list of questions. We're obviously not going to get to them all. We have to try to stay on the track. So it's probably going to be my last question for this. And we could go on all day, but we've got two other hands that we have to get through. And there's going to be some new information for you. Last question before the break. Admiral Gallaudet, I know that you were privy to the incidents regarding the USS Roosevelt. In fact, there's another distinguished guest we have with us here today, Ryan Graves, who was a pilot, who has been very helpful informing Congress about some of the air safety issues because he himself has come up close and personal with one of these objects, whatever they are. Could you please provide a brief synopsis on your experience, and more importantly, what was the reaction by certain elements within the Department of Defense and some of your frustration that you experienced regarding that type of reporting?
Thanks, Lou. Yes, I'd be glad to. So at the time of the Roosevelt UAP sightings, I was the one-star admiral in charge of all the Navy meteorologists and oceanographers. And I had aerographers mates on the ship doing the weather forecasts. And as the chief meteorologist of the Navy, my responsibility was safety of flight, one of my main responsibilities. And at the time, I received an email on the Navy's classified system, secret system, and it was addressed to every subordinate under a command called Fleet Forces Command, the four-star command that I reported to, and that the commander of the Theodore Roosevelt Strike Group reported to, as well as several other units. And attached to the email was the Go Fast video that everybody's seen now and has been declassified and released to the public. And the email title was Urgent Safety of Flight Issue, and all capital letters. And it came from the operations officer of Fleet Forces Command asking if any of the recipients of the email knew what these were, these UAP, because they were having numerous near midair collisions, as Ryan Graves saw firsthand, his squadron mates. And then the next day, that email was wiped from my computer, and no one talked about it in any subsequent meetings at Fleet Forces Command. And this was very unusual because the primary job of Fleet Forces Command is to prepare Navy units to deploy, like the Theodore Roosevelt Strike Group. And that exercise was a critical pre-deployment requirement to get pilots certified to land on the flight deck. And so not talking about an urgent safety of flight issue, for example, the UAP that split a section of aircraft, you don't want anything to get within a mile of an F-18 when it's operating. So that they didn't talk about it, that was covered up, didn't sit well with me. And that's the reason I have come out today, or really for the past few years, to talk about this and make sure we support all these reasons to acknowledge and be more transparent about UAP activity and data. And that's why I'm on the advisory board of Ryan's American for Safe Aerospace, and we've been advocating for the FAA to institute a system of reporting with standards to get more information out there to support safety of flight and science.
Excellent. Admiral Gallaudet, if we have a question by Representative Burlison, go ahead, sir. Floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you. Mr. Davis, but I wanted to ask before this panel's over, I want to pull some threads here. The what is your understanding of the physics or the likely propulsion technology? What is your assessment of what the capabilities are and how it's being achieved? And then also, what I want to ask about materials and energy as well.
We can only speculate. These things are so far advanced. We can only speculate. The best speculation I can come up with is General Relativity does a great job predicting something like a warp bubble. UAP do exhibit the phenomenon of some light or less than light speed warp bubbles. However, that becomes a challenge when you talk about UAP that dived into the ocean and climb up out of from under the ocean and up into the air. So warp.
So it's not warping space-time.
That's a warp in space-time, yeah.
It is.
That's described by Einstein's general theory of relativity.
Yeah.
And so the problem is
Doesn't gravity warp space-time,
that's right.
right?
Yeah.
So these objects are changing the space-time around them.
Yeah, the thin shell of energy and the type of energy it would have to be negative energy density, and it would be consistent with the type of energy density that you can create from the quantum vacuum. And examples of that are the Casimir cavity that has a little vacuum region that's bound by the two plates of the cavity. There's also squeeze states of light where that's a laser beam where you're going to take some part of canonical noise fluctuations from out of that part of the beam you're not interested in and pile it up elsewhere in the phase space, and this is getting really technical. So I'll just kind of keep it this way. You're going to take the quantum vacuum fluctuations that we know as quantum noise or shot noise and laser beams. You're going to pile it up somewhere else in an area you're not interested in measuring, and you only want to measure the amplitude of that beam. And at that point, when you take the quantum vacuum fluctuations out of that amplitude, that energy density goes negative. And the energy density is the square of the amplitude. So that goes negative. And that's an example of negative energy. The mass of the Earth creates space-time curvature.
If it was, I'm sorry.
Oh, I was going to say, so that space-time curvature, which we feel is the force of gravity on the surface of the Earth, drags down quantum vacuum fluctuations of the quantum fields that are out in space near the Earth, in the vicinity of the Earth. And that energy density happens to be negative. And so this is an example of theoretically predicted astronomical sources of negative energy as well as planetary sources of negative energy. So that's what you would need to build a warp bubble. And that's what you would need to build construct a shell.
Just a brief comment of clarification. We have two pillars of modern physics, quantum mechanics and Einstein's theory of gravity, which is curvature of space-time.
Right.
We don't have a reliable theory that combines
Unified theory.
That's right.
quantum gravity. So what we are hearing is speculation. We do not have the knowledge to figure out if you can create curvature of space-time out of negative energy density because we have never mastered this technology. We don't have an understanding of that. So it's possible that, a millennium from now, we'll have those quantum gravity engineers. That's possible. Currently, we're just like too primitive technologically to figure it out. The question is there something in possession of government that scientists should look into? And, I would love to help government figure it out because it may guide us about a theory of quantum gravity if we have something.
Yeah, so we have good ideas about these things, and we can speculate on them, on what the best approach to take to build a warp bubble or the shell of negative energy that would create a torus wormhole, which would be a shortcut through space-time between two distant points. But we have crafted our possession. There are no physicists literally working in those programs. They're basically mechanical, aerodynamics, aerospace, thermal control engineers, electrical engineers, and material scientists. The material science is a part of the engineering offer. Usually kind of overlaps chemistry as well. And they've never had a physicist like him or I. They've never had an applied physicist or an experimental physicist. And so they are really lacking in the ability to understand how these things fly.
Sir, the legacy program has been very insulated and insular, so unfortunately, it's a bit of a
forget my approach here, but a bit of an incestuous community. There's not a whole lot of outside involvement because it is so highly classified, and that's been some of the frustration and I think challenges, technologically speaking, because we haven't been able to recently apply new talent, new ideas, new theories to what maybe what the U.S. government may be in possession of.
And what about the energy potential?
The energy is a question.
Accomplish some of the things we're seeing, right?
Yeah, I haven't been able to access that.
Dr. Davis, can you talk for a moment, sorry, about the Nimitz incident, the calculations for the object to go from 80,000 feet within less than a second, 50 feet over the wire? What type of energy requirement are we talking about?
Hundreds of times the total electrical energy produced in the United States annual. That's the kind of energy that is representative of the observed features and performances of UAP craft, especially Tic-Tac that the Nimitz encountered in November of 2004. And so it's hundreds and hundreds of times what the United States produces in annual electrical power. And so that compares really well with interstellar spacecraft that would travel relativistic or ultra relativistic being anywhere from 90 to 99% speed of light. The energy just is astronomically huge. So these craft, I don't have the security clearances I need to know to get access to the technical details, but I need to understand that the craft are consistent in size with the Tic-Tac, even double in size of the Tic-Tac. That would be up to about 100 feet long by 50 feet diameter of that type. Boomerang-shaped craft, arrow-shaped craft, triangular-shaped craft, and so forth. The biggest ones that had been observed, especially that we investigated at NIDS in 1999, involved the Scott Air Force Base. That one was a 600-foot long craft, and it was about roughly 100 feet tall. And so they don't have possession of craft like that. I've never been told that. It's usually the more man-scale.
Something they couldn't move.
Yeah.
So we might be able to.
Yeah, so we can only speculate. I know Jim Kasky wrote in his book, I wrote the title of it, but anyway, it was Colin Kelleher, who I worked with at NIDS, and George Now of KLAS TV in Las Vegas. And so Jim mentioned, and Jim was the program manager for the AAS, the OSAP, the AAS WAP, I think it was. And so basically he described in his book, somebody, I don't know if it was him because I think he said it was him, went inside one of these craft that he had access to, and they couldn't recognize any propulsion or power devices or systems inside the craft. It was completely unusual. Travis Taylor and I have speculated that possibly they're teleporting energy from a remote distant location where the energy is produced. It's transported to the craft. And that's how the craft can move around without having to carry propellant or a rocket engine or an advanced work drive engine on it. That's one possibility that they're speculating on.
On the material, so what you have me thinking is carbon can take multiple forms, right? And are you saying that is the same with other material, other elements? The way which what we found is different forms of these elements that we have.
It would be different elements. It'd be different combinations of the elements.
And then isotopic ratios as well, correct?
Yeah. So you're going to have a variety of whatever structural part of this that came off of UAP, and I don't know if that was it, but I didn't have way better than just AP access. I only had GSSCI. So at the SCI level, I was informed that there'd be combinations of elements from the periodic table, combinations of their isotopes. So we have the brightening elements as they naturally occur, or some isotopes of them mixed together in a certain way, and then they're structurally built in a very unusual way that even today we have no the equivalent or analog to. So this is about as much as I was given information at an SCI on it.
And then do you have or can you comment on whatever species have been piloting these craft? How are they large? Are they multiple species? Are they what was their size, and how many are usually on a craft?
They're typically the multiple species. People are familiar with the Greys, the Nordics. People have talked about reptilians and insectoids. It's not that they're reptilian or insectoid, it's that they resemble to the Pacific a reptile or insect type humanoid, because they have this a head and four limbs and torso. So
Large, small,
human size, human scale.
and are there how many are in crew?
Well, the Greys I'm familiar with from investigating the crash at Corona, which is misnamed the crash of Roswell. It's not the crash of Roswell; it's the crash of Corona in Mexico. Those were Greys; those are 4 foot tall, and the Nordics are typically human size, probably I've heard 5-6 feet tall. And same with the people who mislabel reptilian and insectoid; they're roughly that height too. I haven't heard anything about anything 7 or 8 feet or 9 foot tall.
Interesting.
Of that nature.
So, dinner-ish. Folks, what we're gonna do here for time, we're gonna
out at the wrong guy.